Good morning. What a pleasure it is to join with you in worship this morning and to gather with this community of faith. It's a pleasure to introduce myself too. My name is Ryan Page. As Jan said, I am the community organizer for Vermont Interfaith Action. Uh, Recently relocated to the Upper Valley from North Carolina. We've been living there for about 10 years and moved back up here to restart life just in December. So we're still new and still getting used to everything. But it's a privilege to share a little bit of my story and what I'm here to do and what I'm doing here through VIA with you this morning. To start, a little about myself. I'm a pastor's kid. I grew up in the parsonage of a United Methodist church on Long Island, where my father has been the pastor for 36 years. He's retiring this June. And I remember from very early ages the people who would frequently haunt our church and our home, people who needed help. It was a pretty regular experience for my dad to get a call or to have someone knock on our front door asking for something, usually money or sometimes food, sometimes a place to stay. And I remember the lengths to which my parents would go to meet those needs, giving money or food or clothing, and usually directing them to the church, which was across the parking lot, or to local shelters for long-term care. I remember there was a group of homeless men camped out in the woods behind the fence of our backyard where my brothers and I played, and never once had the police called on them. There was a lot of justice in my world growing up. And sometimes it was the same people that needed that justice over and over again. Sometimes it was the same people asking for help. I remember a man named Bill. It was a paraplegic who orbited our church community. He walked around by balancing his massive body around on these two crutches and dragging his mostly limp feet behind him. Bill was one of the regulars. He never seemed to have enough. My dad took a lot of trips with other men from the church to pick Bill off the floor of his own home when he fell because he had a lot of need. I remember Ronnie, another regular. Ronnie was probably in his 30s or 40s. He had a face that was pockmarked with a bad case of teenage acne. Ronnie was schizophrenic, and he would often come to our house after wandering the streets because he knew somewhere in his mind that Christ Church was an okay place for him. It's also where his Al-Anon group met. My parents took care of these people. My parents are good people. And through them, I got to witness one kind of justice firsthand for many years as a young person. And that meet the needs justice would serve as the gold standard in my life for almost 3 decades. Until August of 2017. Charlottesville, Virginia. Nazis and Klansmen and chants of death and destruction on public display on purpose. I hardly slept that week. And when I finally found my sense of self again, I was different. It felt like it all happened in a moment, but in reflecting back on that moment and why it was such a dramatic shift for me, I realized that I had been changing underneath for many, many years. Like an underground river will slowly erode the foundations of the earth, preparing for the inevitability of a sinkhole. The foundation of my world was being eroded by the truth that the actual world was filled with injustice, that as a straight, cisgendered, white Christian male in the United States, I never had to encounter and was effectively allowed to ignore. Charlottesville was my sinkhole. And at that time, I became galvanized to another hard fact. The meet the needs justice of my parents and my childhood was insufficient to fix the problem on its own. There is a system and a power behind that system that drives the world forward as it deems fit. A system designed to feed the rich at the expense of the poor, designed to exploit the masses and keep them in their place, designed to make some noble and others vile. It's a system that has largely defined our culture, our laws, our ways of thinking, our ways of seeing, our ways of existing. No matter how good Randy or Leslie Page are, no matter how much they give, it's at best going to make a scratch on the surface of this monstrous system that controls so much beyond the scope of what good people can do. In my personal reconstruction after Charlottesville, I became committed to facing injustice in a systemic direction. Since then, I've spent most of my learning listening to and sitting at the proverbial feet of BIPOC and queer folk, hearing about their experiences with life, gaining a decent picture, not a perfect picture, but a decent picture of what systemic justice actually looks like. And the more I learn, the more I empathize and sympathize with my siblings who go through this, the more my perspective and my questions themselves begin to change. And I think back on Bill, the paraplegic from my dad's church who never had enough. I know now that's because he was living on disability, which barely pays for food, let alone rent or utilities. Bill probably had Medicaid, but how was he going to get treatment? His only access to healthcare required reliable transportation, which is difficult for a person whose legs don't work. And he would likely need to see specialists who were probably in offices all over Long Island. I think of Ronnie, who wandered to our front door because he had no home. Where else could he have gone? Why wasn't he at a shelter? Were there even shelters in our town? I don't think so. I don't remember them. Were they adequately funded to address the needs of the people that are there and his needs as a schizophrenic person? We can, as individuals, spend our whole lives in dedication to serving others. And I know this might sound contradictory to my current vector, but we should. As people of faith, I believe we share an awareness of the thrum of the heartbeat of the universe, pushing us toward helping and serving other beings that all might experience life and love and freedom. That is a worthy way to spend our days on this planet. And as we go about in that way, I also believe that we should find ways to challenge and change the system that is harming all of those other beings. I think about how the world could be different if we had interceded in that way. What if Bill was paid enough to actually care for all of his needs, including personal care and transportation? What if, as a paraplegic, he was seen for who he was and his dignity and worth were considered equal to the others in our community, not based on his contribution to the economy? What if Ronnie knew that beyond just a well-meaning church, that he could walk to a shelter where he would have a clean bed and someone to check in with who knew his name and knew what his needs were? What if he could walk into a clinic, any clinic, and get the medication he needed so desperately, even if he couldn't pay for it? What if in our world there were police ordinances that demanded the equal valuation of BIPOC lives and had appropriate measures of accountability when those lines were crossed? What if regulations were in place that required big companies to rely on sustainable sources of energy and lofted hefty fines for ecocide? What if the migrant workers who live in this state didn't have to worry about getting deported just because they showed their faces at a doctor's appointment? These are the kinds of questions that drive me now. The desire not just to pull people out of the river, but to go upriver and find out why they're falling in or being pushed in and try to put a stop to that. I know that it's lofty and aspirational, but I really believe that together we can do this. I'm by no means an expert. I'm new to this job. I'm new to this region. I don't have all the answers. I don't do things right all the time. I'm just trying, like all of us. And I resonate with the quote from Theodore Parker that Martin Luther King Jr. famously paraphrased. I do not pretend to understand the moral universe. The arc is a long one. My eye reaches but little ways. I cannot calculate the curve and complete the figure by experience of sight. I can divine it by conscience. And from what I see, I am sure that it bends toward justice. My conscience tells me that this is the right path, and that as the universe unfolds, it is offering all of us each of us an opportunity to participate in the bending of its moral arc. This is hard work, admittedly. And admittedly, it's impossible to do on our own, which is why intervention and activism and charity, like my parents were doing, was so appealing, because that's accomplishable by ourselves. But if we're going to change the system, if we are going to really bring true justice to our community, we have to get together to do it. The system's a powerful one, but we're powerful too, especially when we band together and use our voices and our energy in a single direction. And that's the kind of work that I'm doing now with Vermont Interfaith Action. We believe in the power of people when they unite and move as one. We work with communities of faith across the state to help people find, claim, and use their power, the power inherent in all of us and in every community of faith, to make those kinds of changes. And as the organizer for this area, I look forward to ways that I can partner with UCUV, with other churches and communities of faith in this area, and with each of you here committed to justice, to make that a reality for our community. Thank you for having me here today.
I heard this story recently. It was told by Rabbi Ariel Berger. It is a true story given to him by his son's friend Mason. Mason's grandparents were survivors of the Holocaust. They were Polish and Jewish and were taken to Auschwitz 3 weeks after they were married. Upon arrival, they were separated, and every evening, Mason's grandfather would go to the fence separating the men's and the women's sections. He would bring her a crust of bread or an extra potato if he could. Until the time when Mason's grandmother was transferred to work on the rabbit farm at the end of the camp. The rabbit farm was run by a Polish man who noticed right away that the rabbits received better food and care than the Jewish prisoners. Mason's grandmother, in her work, cut her arm on a piece of barbed wire, and the cut got infected. It wasn't a serious infection, if you had antibiotics. But of course, if you were Jewish in that place at that time, there was no way you were getting antibiotics. So what did this Polish man who was running the rabbit farm do? He cut his own arm open and he placed his wound on her wound so that he would get the infection that she had. He did become infected, and he went to the Nazis and he said, I am one of your best managers. This rabbit farm is very productive. If I die, you're going to lose a lot of productivity. So I need medicine. They gave him medicine and he shared it with her, and he saved her life. What does it take to be the kind of person who will share someone else's wound? What does it take to push up against the status quo, the culture, with courage and do a brave thing? What does it take to see a person as a person when everything around you is telling you not to? I have been thinking about this story ever since I heard it. And I've been thinking about this word, commitment, and what it really means to be committed to justice in such a way that you would risk so much for it, for someone else's right to really live. I looked up the roots of the word commit. And in Latin, the first part of the word means to bring together. And the second part of the word means to release or let go. I find a lot of wisdom in the roots of this word. The first part, to bring together, to connect our own tender heart of care and compassion with our hands and our feet, putting into action our deepest understanding of justice. Uniting with yourself and your values first, and then uniting with others, together, making a louder noise, a stronger voice, more hands to carry the work forward. The second part of the word instructs us that when we do the hard work for justice with the goal of positive transformation, we do it because we are committed to do so. We release the outcome. We don't do the work for praise or recognition, but because our deepest truth tells us it is right and good. Your good works are released out into the world. And so is the love that prompted the action. And that love, that kindness, that courageous effort, the intangible essence, that goes forth into the world too. And it is powerful. And it makes a difference. We cannot quantify it or measure it with precise instruments, but we are transformed by it. The core of our Unitarian Universalist faith calls us to make this commitment to justice, to see each person as worthy, and to remember our interdependence, all of us and all of the creatures and our planet itself. Our Universalist ancestors believed that everyone experienced peace and serenity after death. They did not believe that there was hell in the afterlife, but they could see the hell that humans had created in this life. And their religious beliefs insisted that they work to alleviate the suffering that they saw all around them, that they themselves experienced, and to work toward creating heaven here on earth. Elie Wiesel, a Holocaust survivor and Nobel Prize winner, who received the prize for being a messenger of peace, atonement, and dignity to mankind. Wiesel said, "The key in all of this is never allow anyone to be humiliated in your presence." This anyone includes all humans and the earth and all her creatures. That Polish man at Auschwitz may not have saved hundreds of people. He may not have been able to make much change at all in the death camp where he worked. But he connected with one person who was suffering, who was being humiliated by being treated as disposable. And he acted from his humanity, his loving heart that knows what justice demands, and he helped her. And his grandson, Mason, is dedicated to a life of service to social justice as an activist and a writer because of what happened to his grandparents. Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel spoke of the religious calling as being maladjusted with positive moral force, neither indifferently conformed to the reality of evil and suffering, nor hardened to wondrous and redemptive possibilities that we can make real. That we do make real when we get together and when we challenge systems that deny justice. We make it real, this justice we insist upon, shaped by our dedication to the values that shape us, a joyful and radical inclusion, honoring the great mystery of life with appreciation and humility and a commitment to collective liberation that frees all. So may it be, and I invite you to spend just a moment together in silent meditation.